Hello and welcome to the Memory Capsule podcast, where we interview members of the Pokemon trading card game community. My name is Rafal Gladys. Each week we'll be speaking with our guests about their background with Pokemon TCG, how they got involved with the game, and give them an opportunity to share their love of the game. Today's guest is Phinn Lynch. Phinn has been a prolific player for the better part of a decade, with a regionals victory, two regional finals placements, a top 32 finish at the 2015 World Championships, and dozens of day twos and other top finishes. Phinn is also the owner of CutterTap.com, one of the best resources for articles on deck building and tournament results. How are you doing today?
I'm great, man. How are you?
I'm doing pretty good. Glad to be talking to you today.
Yeah, me too.
For anyone who is maybe hearing your voice for the first time, maybe they've seen your name on stream but haven't really heard much from you, what would you like to our listeners know about you?
You covered a lot of it. Yeah, I just play a lot of Pokemon. I like to write a lot. Um, I guess I'll mention like the site's been around since 2017 and still going strong. Big things coming with the site very soon. I will not drop any specifics yet because of the other people involved, but I'll just say there's some big changes coming with the site that I'm really excited about. But I'm going to Charlotte and Toronto soon and planning on just playing as much Pokemon and writing as much as I can.
Awesome, I love that so much. Now, before we dive a little bit more into your background, I'm just going to start with a question I ask every guest. What is your favorite card of all time?
Probably Seismitoad EX, which is gonna get me a lot of hate, I think. But that card was, oh man, I got a lot of points from Seismitoad EX. I love that card. If not that, then probably Ultra Ball or Verse Seeker. Those cards were super sick. Like Ultra Ball was really an interesting card back in like 2014 because it there was like a lot more skill involved because with most decks there was like nothing you wanted to discard unless you're playing like a dark patch deck. So it made it like a really skillful card because it was like there was very little ball search at the time, so everyone had to play Ultra Ball but like nobody wanted to discard anything. So there was a lot of like resource management that made it a very skillful card. And then Verse Seeker just like enabled so many interesting strategies just because there was a lot of like good one ofs at the time. And there was like the downside of item lock being prominent. So you had to like balance this desire to like deal with item lock decks along with like having the ability to take advantage of like such an incredible item, like one of the best items ever, probably.
Definitely, yeah. And I mean, while we're on the topic of 2014 format, let's kind of just jump right in. How did you get involved with the Pokemon trading card game? Were you a player as a kid, or did you get involved with it later in your life?
Yeah, I didn't like compete at major tournaments when I was a kid. I like collected random cards and didn't know anything about them when I was like I don't know, like 6 or 7. I remember like I had a lemonade stand with my dad and we got some money and I was like, I want to buy this base set hollow muck. And he's like, this is like $3 for one card. Are you sure you want to spend your money on this? And I was like, yeah, I want this muck really bad. and so I was a collector when I was a kid, and then I got a little bit older and I was like, I don't know, probably like 12, I want to say, whatever I was in 2010. So it was 13 years ago. So I must have been like 12 or 13. And I was trying to like make up games to play with my friends, just like create our own games. And then I saw this, I think it was a Gyarados Raichu double theme deck box. And I was like, I'm going to try this. So I pretty much forced my friends to play with me because I didn't really want to, but I was like, no, this is really cool. It's like the cards, shiny cardboard. Let's play with the shiny cardboard. So yeah, I did that, and then I got tired of like nobody wanting to play with me, so I found this league, and I brought my deck there that had 8 double colorless energy in it, and a guy there was like, "Yeah, you can't do this. You've got like 6 bill in your deck and 8 double colorless. This is not a legal deck." And I was like, "What do you mean? What's a legal deck?" And so basically, he got me to build a Feraligatr Prime deck
Hmm.
that was terrible, and then a little bit later, I was playing Darkrai EX, and that was like the first meta deck I had. And a couple of years later, I was like, I want to take this seriously. And so in 2014, 14, I started playing competitively, and then I got to Worlds in 2015. So that's pretty much my start.
Yeah, so from 2010, 2011, having a deck but having no clue what it does to being at Worlds just a few years later, what do you think led you to such quick improvement as a player?
I just like the only thing I cared about was Pokemon. So I would like I met a guy at one of my at my league. Place was called A1 Comics. His name is Michael Perez. Some people like people who know about me probably know of him. He's been my best friend for years. Anyway, I met him and we just started talking all the time and like testing together and pretty much all I did or cared about all through high school was play Pokemon. Like I would be sitting in English class writing out deck lists over and over, just like trying to figure out the best deck list for every deck, and not paying attention at all in school, which I wouldn't recommend. And then like during lunchtime, I would go in the library by myself and I would play against myself for like the 30 minutes we had. And I would go home and I would just play as much as I could. I was just involved in Pokemon constantly. That was really the only thing that mattered to me at all. So in terms of like actual testing, I was testing like 6 hours a day every day. And like when you just practice that much all the time and go to tournaments literally as much as you physically can, you're just gonna get better and you're gonna do well consistently if the only thing you care about is Pokemon. Like it's just bound to happen.
Yeah, inevitably. If you don't, then something's going wrong, right? If you're spending 6 hours a day and don't improve, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I just kept doing that for a long enough period of time that made it so yeah, I mean, pretty much like I said already, like it just I couldn't at least do somewhat well.
Mm-hmm. Did you have kind of a other like was it just like the league was like your main Pokemon community, or were you got kind of involved online with other players or testing groups that were helping you improve, or was it kind of a one man thing for a while?
Um, yeah, for a while it was just like me and one or two other guys that I would meet up with, and we would just like find times to meet through Facebook Messenger, and then eventually I had like my first sort of team. We were actually called Team Ultra Ball, because we all loved Ultra Ball, which kind of links back to what we were talking about. But yeah, they were just like locals. And then eventually we formed Team Cutter Tap like a few years later, um, which are like a lot of the guys that write on the site now. Um, and yeah.
And we will get to Cutter Tap pretty soon. Before we get to that, I do want to talk a little bit about that year that you made it to Worlds and got ended up getting top 32 at Worlds. And we were talking
Yeah.
about this just before we started recording. Limitless doesn't show, but you also won a regional that year.
Yeah.
Could you tell us a bit about winning that regional and making that big Worlds run?
Yeah, that regional was super cool. So that was the Salt Lake City regionals. Salt Lake has always been like my best event for some reason, but yeah, and in day one I played Seismitoad Slurpuff with Trump Card. Super insane deck. The previous event I went to, I believe, was California States, and Christy Britton got first with the deck. You couldn't find people's deck lists on Limitless or anything like that because it didn't exist yet. So nobody had the list that she played except for my friend Keon. And then Keon was like, "Hey, this is the list she played. It's really good." And I was like, "Wow, you're just gonna give this to me? Like, you're just gonna share this insane deck with me?" And he's like, "Yeah, it's fine. You can just use it." And I was like, "All right." So for the next event, Salt Lake, I was like, "I'm just gonna play this deck, and I'm gonna change one card." And so it was an insanely good deck, and nobody really had the list except for Christy and Keon and a couple other people. So um, I think most of us made it to top eight. And then once I was in top eight, it was one of the events that where you switch formats. So
Yeah,
it
I
was
was just about to
expanded.
ask. This was standard
Yeah,
day one, expanded day two, right?
yeah, it was expanded day two, and I was like, okay, so from going to a few regionals in this format, I knew that most people just kind of stuck to the same deck they were playing in day one and changed a couple cards. So I was like scouting around top eight, like asking people, figuring out what these other players in top eight were playing, because I was like, half these people are just going to play the same deck, and it was almost all Executor and Seismitoad decks. And I was like, okay, what beats both of these decks? And it was Verzian Genesect, was like the best answer to those, because obviously you hit for Toad for weakness, and the energy acceleration makes it really hard for Executor's supporter lock to like make a difference, because you basically just need to have two Pokemon in play, and they sustain themselves through most of the game. So
This was like the
um,
Executor. It's like 10 damage and just lock supporters, right?
yeah, blockade. It was really good. But anyway, I chose to play Virizion Genesect in top 8 because of that. There was no like top 32. There was no day 2. Day 2 was just top 8 at this time. So I chose to play that, and I was like, okay, so these other players here, some of them are actually really smart, really good players. They're going to be thinking the same thing I'm thinking and play Virizion Genesect. So I was like, what's the best tech for that? And so I texted, uh, oh man, I can't believe I'm forgetting his name. He won Worlds with Virizion Genesect from Canada. Oh man, how am I
Is
forgetting his
that
name? This
Andrew
is so
Estrada?
bad. Andrew Estrada,
Yeah.
yes. Oh man, I hope Andrew never sees this. That's so bad that I forgot his name. Anyway, I texted him and I was like, "How do you beat the mirror?" Because like he won mirror in the finals of Worlds that year, and he just was like, "Play this card, and this card." And I was like, "Okay, double tool scrapper, drift bloom, you know." And so I basically just played a Virizion Genesect deck, teched out for mirror. Um, and then in top 8, I faced a Yveltal deck, narrowly beat that. And then in top 4, like I expected, I played against Virizion Genesect Mirror, and I won that because of my text. And then in finals, I played another Virizion Genesect Mirror and won again because of my text that he suggested for me to play. So, um, yeah, I basically won that tournament just from other people, like from my connections to other people, like Keon giving me the initial deck, and then Christy making the Toad deck, and then day 2, Andrew helping me out with the list. So, shout out to all those people who pretty much made it possible for me to win that event. I probably wouldn't have otherwise.
You still gotta be good at piloting it, right?
That's true. Yeah, I mean, I played really well. I was definitely on point, like really on point in that format. I probably played better back then than I do now. That was at the point where I was still just playing constantly as much as I could.
Since then, you've also had two regionals finals placements, and this is kind of where I wanted to ask a little bit about your choices with deck building, because I
Yeah,
mean, just looking at your recent tournament results, you are playing usually not the BDIF. I don't, is that kind of an
right.
intentional choice by you to always try to counter the best deck?
Yeah, I just don't like playing what's the best deck usually because um I just feel like there's a lot of the time there's somebody else out there who probably has played the deck more and has more experience with it than me. So I figure like if that's the case, then if I run into them, like my goal is always to win the event, right? So if there is somebody who's playing this best deck in the format perfectly with a perfect list, if I go up against them, am I really like good enough to deal with that? Maybe, maybe not, but I don't know if I have the time in with this deck to be able to do that. So I'd rather just play something that is going to surprise them, even if it doesn't necessarily like flat out beat it. If both players are playing perfect, I know that the surprise factor can give me enough to be able to win the matchup, like just based on that. Um, and that's been a big part of like why I choose certain decks. Like Whimsicott at EUIC last year, I chose because nobody really was preparing for or expected Whimsicott. They didn't have any testing against it really, so I was like, okay, this seems good. So I think I made top 64 with that, and then the Suicune is probably a better example. Actually, like nobody had a good list for Suicune. Everyone was playing that deck wrong. People either weren't playing cross switchers or they were, and then the other cards in the deck were bad. So I just found Suicune and I was like, okay, this seems like a very difficult deck to play. So I'm not going to run into that issue where I'm going to face somebody else who's like better at the deck than me, because I'm just going to put all the time I can into it and figure out the best list. And there's not very many people playing it anyway. Because I just like, I never want to have a disadvantage in a mirror match. That's the thing that uh, I guess kind of drives a lot of my deck choice. So if I face anybody playing the same deck as me, then I can't have that problem. And it felt like my RCS matchup was about even, but again, surprise factor can probably put me over the edge. And then Mew was like a really good matchup, and it was one of the only decks that actually beat Mew because there was no like Drapion or Mightyena or anything like that at the time.
Yeah.
Um, so it just seemed like surprising and didn't really have any bad matchups except for Jolteon VMAX, which was really low in popularity at the point. and it beat what was pretty much the best deck in the format. So yeah, it just seemed like a good call, and I like the deck a lot.
Yeah, and I mean, just looking at the Salt Lake results from last year, 75% of the day two meta was Arceus or Mew decks. You were one of
Yeah,
two Suicune players. There's only four Jolteon players. One of them made it to top eight. I think just because of a DQ. But other than that,
yeah,
unlikely that you'd ever bump into that deck. And even then, all of the Arceus decks were out here teching for Mew with Moltres. So no one's ready for a Suicune deck.
right. Yeah, I think that top eight was Andre Chiasson, and I was really scared that I was gonna run into him. I was like, oh no, this is gonna ruin my run. Like this is my tournament. Little did I know that Arceus Gengar would be what
Yeah.
stopped me from winning. I was like, dude, I got matched up against that, and I was like, what in the world? Like, how would I ever prepare for this? But that's exactly the same mentality, right? Like he
Mm-hmm.
played a deck that nobody else would prepare for, as and so did I. But it just happened to be the case that he had like it seems like accidentally made the perfect deck for countering Suicune.
Yeah, I remember watching that finals where he just puts down the collapsed stadium, and it's like, what are you gonna do now?
Yeah, yeah, and I don't think I had a stadium at the time, and like you can kind of deal with one collapsed, but he also had the hyper potions and just like some other stuff like not playing Inteleon, so he had Bibarel instead, which meant that he didn't have to fill up his bench as much as like an Inteleon deck would, and it was like all these smaller counters that like don't make a difference if I face just like one of them in my opponent's deck. They all came together to be like a hard counter because I had already faced two Arceus decks before that. I played against Nick Moffat with his Arceus counterbox deck, and I think it was Xander Perot with his just like regular Arceus Inteleon deck that had like a tech Sydney and a tech Bibarel, which was kind of cute. But yeah, those weren't like super hard for me to beat. It was just Bibarel plus healing plus collapsed plus super high HP Pokemon that was too hard for me to deal with.
Yeah, it was just conveniently the perfect deck at the time, and it never got a placement ever again. It just won a regional, and then there it goes.
Yeah, yeah. I don't think it was that great of a deck, but I mean, no shade at Drew. Like he won, obviously. He had something going for him. Yeah, I don't know. And even if it was just regular Gengar, like if it was the Houndour build that some people were playing in order to counter Mew, like I beat those, and that was no problem. I think I faced like two or three of those throughout that event.
Because they would
Um,
damage themselves, and it's pretty easy to kind of knock out at that
yeah,
point.
yeah, and they have big benches, right? Because they need to bench like Crobat or Luminion because their draw engine is pretty poor, and then they need to bench like two Houndooms and like probably another attacker. So they're pretty much filling up their bench to make Suicune do a lot of damage. Um, but anyway, it's cool. I'm still happy with the second. I frequently forget that I actually got second. Like I'll talk to people about it, and I feel like I won the tournament for some reason, but I did not.
Yeah, I do remember after that event you did. I think I vaguely remember you making a post on social media that that whole top eight was a bit of a blur for you. I think it was a very exhausting day from what I remember.
Yeah, yeah, I was super tired. I couldn't remember much about any of my games, but I watched them afterwards to remind myself what actually happened, and then it all kind of came back after
Yeah,
that.
just in a trance, just conveniently got second at a regional, right?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like you get like I just in general, I just feel like humans can get into this like deep flow state where you don't even really know consciously what's going on anymore. You're just insanely focused. And you're just kind of doing what you're doing, and it's almost like you're unconscious after a
Mm-hmm.
certain point.
Do you think that's a thing that players are able to kind of achieve when they're so comfortable with their deck that it kind of feels like it plays itself? Is that a thing that you try to emulate when you practice a deck and prepare for a tournament?
Yeah, I mean, if I get to the point with a deck where I feel like I'm in that sort of flow state, I know something good is happening. And it felt like that only got better at the next event. Like the next event after that, I think was maybe Indianapolis, or the no, because there was EUIC after that.
Yeah, it looks
But
like
anyway,
it was EYC and then Indianapolis after that. Just checking the
yeah.
timeline here. Yeah.
So by that time, everyone had caught on Suicune, but I just loved the deck so much that I couldn't stop playing it. And I played like significantly better at Indianapolis than I did at Salt Lake, in my opinion. Like the time management had gone up like so much. I was able to do stuff that I wasn't even able to do at Salt Lake with the deck. And that felt really good. But I also only got like 3 hours of sleep the night before because I took a red eye. That's such a bad idea, by the way. Anybody out there that like is thinking about it, like don't take a red eye and then get to the event like Saturday morning after your flight. It feels so bad. Um, but yeah, I think that is something to root for, like, or try to achieve if you can. Just get to that insanely comfortable stage with the deck, especially if it's a high skill level deck, like a deck that involves a lot of sequencing and specific knowledge. If you can get to that point, you can pull off amazing accomplishments. And it's really hard for other people to do that a lot of time with the same kind of deck.
How much do you think choosing kind of a strong deck for the meta matters for success, as opposed to just general comfort with a deck? Like, or do you think people might be better off picking a deck that they're very comfortable with, but might have worse matchups on paper, or just kind of sticking with the best decks they can, even if they're a little bit less comfortable with it?
I generally would say that it's better to play what you're comfortable with. But it's always, I guess, sort of a spectrum might be the right word. Because if you're going into an event and like everyone at the last event that did well is playing heavy counters to the deck that you want to play, and usually people just kind of copy a list from top eight and then make a couple changes. So if you just think like everyone is going to play counters to your deck, you might want to just switch off for one event or something like that. But if you only saw like one person in top eight or maybe two, especially if they didn't make it to finals playing a deck or attack or something that counters yours, then yeah, just go for it. Like I always like to have a backup if I can, just in case like an event comes up before the one I'm preparing for that makes it so that what I was going to play is heavily countered. But generally, I'll just stick to like I like to prepare a deck like a month in advance. So it gets really scary when there's like one more event before whatever I'm prepping for because I know that can sort of make or break the deck. But usually, I just end up playing it, and it usually ends up going pretty well. So in general, I would say just stick to what you're comfortable with, but you also have to be reasonable and understand, like, based on what made top eight at the last event, can definitely make it so it's better for you to just play a different archetype, especially if that deck that you're switching to is relatively simple. Like, if your fallback is like Duraludon or something, it's like, yeah, you probably don't need a whole lot of testing to play that well. So maybe that's a good, fallback deck if your deck is heavily countered.
Gotcha. That makes a lot of sense. And then, just in general, in terms of picking a deck for a regional, what kind of decisions and what like you already kind of mentioned, like looking at the top eight of previous regionals, when a lot of players are going to be copying whatever did well at that regional. What
Yeah.
goes behind you picking those decks so far ahead of time? Like, for example, at Toronto, you and Piper Lapine were the only Mewtwo control lists in day two. What led you to bring that deck?
So that was not a tournament where I prepped a month in advance. I actually had built that Mewtwo list like 1 or 2 days before the event, and then one of my best friends and teammate, Hunter Butler, just like tested every matchup with me for like 3 hours on the maybe the Friday or the Thursday before the event, and I just sent it because it seemed like a really good call for the meta. I think I think Drapion out. Yeah, Drapion was out. It I can't remember all the details exactly, but I just remember thinking that there was like the meta just wasn't very prepared with the same text that it used to have that would counter Mewtwo, and it had gained Radiant Gardevoir and V Guard, I believe, since it was last successful. And it just seemed like a really good time to bring the deck back because nobody was really prepared for control at that point. Like there wasn't very much Snorlax in Lugia decks at that time, and I think Birdkeeper wasn't super popular if I remember, but yeah, that one I just kind of pulled out of nowhere, which is pretty uncharacteristic. I've been doing that more lately though. I like the Whimsicott deck I actually tested for literally one night before EUIC as well. So I don't know. Lately I've been more comfortable like adapting to I don't know, like rogue or new decks more quickly, but I feel like that's a skill that takes a lot of time and experience to develop.
Do you think that you being now kind of a veteran player helps with that? Like seeing, certain archetypes come out and you can kind of see a little bit of kind of a shadow of a former deck you've played, some similarities between how they play. Does that help at all, having played so many decks in the past, that current decks are easier to pick up?
Yeah, I would definitely say so. Like my experience with Vrisian Genesect, for example, made it a lot easier to play um, uh, Arceus V-Star decks because Vrisian's attack is pretty similar to Arceus's attack. Also, ADP, same sort of thing. Like if you've practiced with those decks in the past, it's a lot easier to pick up these new cards that are pretty similar. Um, so I would say that with like Seismitoad EX and Vikavolt, but Vikavolt doesn't actually really act like a Toad deck. Like they're actually quite different. So that doesn't really translate. But yeah, like flower selecting is really similar to decks that used to play Acrobike back in like 2015, I want to say, probably around then. But yeah, like once you get used to those older cards, the new ones that come out are really easy to adapt to. It's sort of like if you used to play an instrument but you haven't played it in a couple of years, you just have to kind of brush off the rust, and then those skills that you developed with them um, back when you used to do it often come back, relatively quickly.
To bounce around a little bit between a couple different tournaments, just looking at your history as a player, could you tell us a little bit more about your top 32 World Championship run in 2015? I know that was kind of on the heels of Jason Klaczynski
Yeah.
winning nationals with Seismitoad, right? Yes, yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
It was
that's
Jason.
right. Yeah.
Yeah. So a lot of people were trying to counter Night March. Rayquaza was very popular. So for anyone who's a little bit less familiar, could you tell us a bit about preparing for that World Championship and how that went?
Yeah. So that was another tournament where we knew like way in advance that we wanted to play Donphan. I think me and my team, I think Cutter Tap had already been formed at that point, I believe. And Jeffrey Chang, he was a really good senior, and I think it might have been him, maybe it was Chris Collins. One of them suggested Donphan to us because Night March was sort of the new deck that was pretty popular, and it just pretty much beat Night March every time. And then also Mega Manetric was a big deck, and the weakness to fighting was really good for Donphan. But it was just a really good hit and run tank deck. You had Robo Substitute, which you threw into the active, which is pretty much identical to Cleffa Pokédoll or something
The
like that.
Lily's Pokédoll, I think, right?
Yeah, Lily's
Yeah.
Pokédoll. It's the same concept, but then you also had like Focus Sash, which makes it so when your Donphan gets hit, it doesn't get knocked out. It has 10 HP left. And it had a second attack called Wreck, which did like a pretty big amount of damage. At least it was a big amount of damage for that time. So you could like hit and run, and anytime they tried to target down your Donphan, if you just have that Focus Sash attached, you get to live through it, and then you close out games with Wreck usually. It did pretty well against like almost everything in the meta except for anything with Seismitoad. And Seismitoad was kind of dying down because of Mega Manetric at that point. Um, I don't remember if it did well against Blastoise, but people weren't really playing Blastoise. It was really a big surprise that Blastoise won that Worlds. Like nobody had predicted that that was going to happen. Um, but yeah, it just seemed like a really good call for that tournament. It was very consistent. It was a super consistent deck, which was that's always something I look for in decks. I want to find a deck with like the best engine possible. In general, that's what I look for. Which is why I liked Inteleon so much because like once you get set up, your engine just chugs along so consistently throughout the game. Um, at least that was the case before Lost Box started using Sableye to get rid of all your Sobbles.
Yeah, oh yeah.
Um, but yeah, it was basically just a meta counter. We knew that we were going to lose to any Toad decks that we faced, most likely. That's what stopped me from making top 8. I lost my final round of that event to a Toad Aromatisse deck, which nobody had played in like forever. Like that deck was big earlier on in the season, and then like nobody played it for like 6 months. And this guy from Indonesia just ruined me with it. But yeah, if I won that, I was gonna make top 8, and he stopped my run and made me very sad.
I'm sorry to hear that. That is
That's right.
unfortunate.
Yeah, it is what it is.
Yeah. The other big tournament that I see in your history is second place at Costa Mesa Regionals with expanded Zoroark that has 4 execute in it.
Oh yeah.
Could you tell us a bit about that run, how that tournament went?
Yeah. So that was an example of me just playing the best deck in the format. Isaiah Williams was somebody who I talked to a lot at that time, and like we were working together. And he had, I think, just gotten second at I can't remember what tournament it was, but he got second with that same deck. Um, and so going into Costa Mesa, I was talking to him. I was like, "What does this lose to?" And he's like, "It literally doesn't lose to anything. It's the best deck in the format by far." And he was totally right. Like it was just incredibly good. And I kept throwing different decks at it, trying to find anything that could beat it. And it was just not even close. Like nothing in the format could beat it. So I was like, okay, well, I just have no option then. I have to play this if literally no other deck can beat it. Um, and that was the case. And it was just like, it was free. It was such a free tournament. The the only thing that stopped me was Igor in finals with the most. I mean, it was just a complete counter deck to Zoroark. Like everyone pretty much knew Zoroark was really good at that point. And you know what was DDG at the time? Those group of guys just all played, um, you know, this Garbodor deck with Drampa and some other stuff, and I think 3 Parallel City or 4. I think they went up to 4 after that tournament because they felt like 3 wasn't even enough, which is just crazy. But yeah, that was literally like the only deck that could deal with it. I didn't really think that was a threat going into the tournament because nobody had played Garbodor for a while and expanded. Um, and you know they hadn't really debuted that deck yet. And it was a super good deck. I mean, it was a really incredible deck. I'm actually really surprised that you know he was able to make it to finals with it because it didn't seem like it had great matchups against a lot of the other meta decks. But Igor's just a super good player, so you know he can do things that you shouldn't be able to do sometimes in tournaments. It's crazy.
Yeah, he is a
But
world champion and a finalist, so there's got to be some
yeah,
skill there, right?
right, yeah. Um, But I mean, it just beat everything. I mean, the deck was so incredible that it could use Hex Maniac like on turn 1 when you go second and still get a proper setup ready for the next turn. Like it didn't even need to use Bridget on turn 1 a lot of the time. And for people who don't know, Hex Maniac was a supporter that you could play that would shut off all of your opponent's abilities on the next turn. So you know you'd go second, use Shaman EX, you know, draw through a bunch of cards, and then put down some Zoras. They go Hex. Your opponent just can't use any abilities on the next turn. And then the turn after that, you like evolve to some Zorags, get an energy down, first secure, hex them again, and then just knock out. And basically, you're just doing tons of damage, like straight out the gate. Turn 2, you're doing tons of damage. You have a super consistent draw engine because you're going trade with Zoroark, and you can use Hex Maniac like 8 turns in a row. It was ridiculous. That combination should have never existed. It was unbelievably broken. And that deck should have won more tournaments. The only reason it didn't is because they banned I think Hex and Puzzle, which was smart because it was unfair.
Yeah. Just looking at the deck at your list right now, banned cards: Hexmaniac banned, Getsis banned, Puzzle, Red Card, Shaman. Like
Yeah,
quarter of the deck is banned right now.
yeah. They were. I mean, I think most of those are some of the most broken cards ever printed.
Now, you've mentioned it a couple times, Cutter Tap, right? So did that originally start off as a team and then turn into kind of an article site? Could you tell us the history of that?
Yeah, it actually was the other way. Or no, what? That's crazy. Actually, I don't remember. I don't remember which one came first. I think it was the site. That's crazy. I don't know how I don't remember this, but my memory is actually pretty poor. I'm surprised I'm remembering most of this stuff. I think it was a site first. I remember putting together the team, and the idea was kind of like we would all write for the site, so we would all work together and like hopefully play the same 60 tournaments and all write on the site. It would, you know, it's like a little community, a little content community. But yeah, I started that I think in 2016, which was pretty soon after Costa Mesa. I honestly I can't remember.
You're good.
I could be
I got
screwing
limitless
people
open to
there.
try to get all the resources. So Costa Mesa
Yeah, I can't remember.
Costa Mesa was March 2018.
Okay, then I'm definitely wrong about that. I'm thinking of a different tournament. Yeah, it was before that.
Okay.
I don't
In
know. It was
2016, you had
2016
a
or
whole
17.
2016 and 17. You had a whole run of top 16s and a bunch of regionals. So it might have been when you were. I'm assuming you were doing pretty well with the team at that point.
Yeah, yeah, a lot of us were doing pretty good. I don't really know what else to say about it. I mean, it was it basically turned into a site that I was just writing. Like it almost turned into my own blog site because um I ended up having no job and I was like, well, I could just write for my own site and not pay other people to write. And so I would just kind of get money from that, which I needed because I wasn't working otherwise. And I started doing coaching. Um Actually I had been coaching for a while. I just turned it up a lot, like was doing a bunch of coaching. So I was, paying the rent and buying groceries and everything just through Pokemon stuff. Which is I guess a little bit more common now. There are more people doing that. But at the time that was like nobody was doing that. And people were, pretty much saying like this is ridiculous. Like you can't just play Pokemon. You need to have a job or something. This isn't sustainable. Um, and I just didn't care. I was like, I don't care. All I care about is Pokemon. I'm just gonna make it my whole life, and so it was.
Yeah.
For a long time. Pokemon was just my whole life. Um, but yeah, it's my baby. I love Cutter Tap. I guess that's what I have to say about that.
Do you think that writing articles and doing coaching has helped you improve as a player, kind of articulating some of the stuff that you maybe have in your mind internally and then having to articulate it as an article or to a student? Do you think that helps you as a player?
Yes and no. So coaching helps learn some new things. Like I've gotten ideas from coaching clients. They've been like, "Hey, what do you think of this idea or this deck?" And I've some at certain points I've been like, "Wow, that's actually really good. I'm going to test that myself." And then I've played some of those ideas to tournaments. So in that sense, it's been good. And just like practicing over and over the lines that I figured out in matches or in matchups, I mean, is helpful too. But at the same time, if you're coaching too much, you can run out of time to actually do testing, and you're always going to be better off in terms of like learning, doing testing with teammates who are really good, like at your skill level or better. You're going to learn more from that than doing coaching because the majority of coaching is kind of just playing against yourself. Like when I'm coaching, a lot of the time, I the person I'm coaching is making plays, but a lot of the time I'm interjecting and saying like, "Hey, if you do this, this is going to be bad for you later. You might want to take this route instead." And after a certain point, it's kind of like I'm just playing against myself, and so I can't really learn anything new from that. Whereas if I'm playing against somebody who's really good on my team, they can teach me new lines or new ways of thinking or different decks. So I would say overall, I probably didn't get better as a player from coaching. I think that time spent on coaching didn't improve me as much as just testing would have. But I think writing really does because, at least for me, the best way for me to think is through writing. So figuring out concepts and ideas and matchups and that sort of thing, like you were talking about with coaching, that's easier for me through writing. It lets me be more creative because I'm less I have more time and I'm by myself. Like I'm actually kind of antisocial in general. It's harder for me to like suggest lines and figure things out on the fly while I'm talking to somebody. Whereas when I'm writing, that's a lot easier. So I think writing has made me better. It's helped my creative process, especially with coming up with rogues. But probably not so much with coaching.
Gotcha. Well, that does make a lot of sense. And, people I've talked to before have also said, if you want to improve as a player, play with someone better than you, right? You learn how to
Yeah,
play your deck with someone at an equal level, but you learn a lot more with somebody better than you. So that makes a lot of sense.
it's definitely true.
And then in terms of CutterTap.com, I know that for a while the site kind of had a bit of a hiatus with the content, and recently you've picked it back up. How has that been going?
Yeah, it's going great. I mean, I was blown away by how quickly the site just came back in terms of like subscriber count and stuff. Because we had something like I don't know, like 50, 60 subs at the height of when it was doing well before I had shut it down. And I was thinking, okay, it's probably going to take, several months to get back to that subscriber count because I've been gone for so long. Probably a lot of people have forgotten about who I am as a player, etc. But I launched the first real article on the site again, like since coming back in October last year, and we're doing better than ever before. And I'm just I don't know. I guess I'm kind of surprised by that, but I think excuse me, sorry. I think a lot of people a lot of people feel like writers on other sites, in a large part, aren't being completely honest about what they're going to play or what they think is good or blah blah blah. But people know that I post whatever I'm going to play for tournaments on the site. I don't think I did for my last tournament, but in general, I will post my 60 or 59 of my cards on the site before the next tournament I'm going to. And when you do that, it just builds up your reputation with people to a level that other writers just they don't get that level because they're never willing to be that honest. And that's understandable because it creates a disadvantage for me going to tournaments because I know if I run into a subscriber that's like read my piece, they're going to know my exact 60. But with less than 100 people actually subscribing to the site, that I don't think that's actually a big deal. I don't think it's like a big factor most of the time because there's just not enough chances that you're going to hit one of those players is just low enough to not really care. But I will say a little caveat to that. Isaiah Bradner like walked up to me at Toronto when I was playing Mewtwo, and he's like, "Hey, I really like your Mewtwo does really cool list." I was like, "Oh, did you see it on Cutter Tap?" He's like, "Yeah." So I'm like, "Okay, so you just know my 60. So like, if I run into you, I'm dead in the water, right?
Yeah.
Like one of the best players in the game. He knows exactly the card counts and everything. Like, that would have put me in trouble probably, but I didn't face him. So, yeah, I would say that's like a big part of the success coming back into running the site is just being as honest as I can and even admitting things that I don't know. Like even saying, I haven't actually tested this matchup. I'm not going to try and explain how you play it because it's all theory, and I don't want to give you guys just theory because theory is not as good as actual testing. So I think that's why people subscribe.
And as someone who has been subscribed and has seen the articles, I'm not going to lie, it is very high quality articles. All of the writers have been very talented. I read Piper's article about that Mewtwo control list, played it to locals the next 2 weeks, and did very, very well. All of the writers are very talented. So, yeah, massive shout out to Cutter Tap. If anyone's interested in really high quality TCG content, please check it out. I would highly recommend it. As we start kind of nearing time to start wrapping up, I do want to ask you just a couple more fun fact questions. There's a couple of tournaments we've already talked about, all of your regional wins, your regional finalist appearances, your Worlds appearance. If I were to ask you what is your favorite tournament of all time, like the favorite best event you've attended, most memorable, would it be one of those or maybe something else? What's kind of the best experience you've had playing the game?
Um, NAIC is my favorite tournament every year. It's like the most fun event by far for me. I don't know which one I liked better, but there was an NAIC where I played Gardevoir GX, and I made top 32 with that. And then there was another one. I think it was actually just a nationals where I played Toad Bats. Actually, that's got to be my favorite one. This is a pretty good short story. So that nationals, I think it was 2016. Nobody was playing Toad Bats anymore. Night March was like king of the format. And I was like, I just love Toad. I got to keep playing Toad. I know there's no lasers in the format anymore, which was like what people thought the lifeblood of the deck was. But I was like, I'm just gonna keep playing this. So I bought my ticket to the tournament. I had no money. Like I had no plan to stay anywhere. I didn't know where I was gonna sleep. I just had enough to register and buy a flight. So I did, and I was like, I'm going to be able to buy lunch on Sunday once I get my boxes for doing well. Like that was my plan. I had no, I was screwed otherwise. So in day one, I found somebody that was willing to let me stay with him that night. I think I just slept in the airport the night on Friday or Thursday or whatever it was before the event. And so that covered my butt. And then I was like, in day two, I made it to day two. I was like, okay, so a little bit closer to getting lunch soon. And then I got to the last round of day two, I'm in top 8 if I win, and then I run into this like random dude playing Trevenant, and nobody was playing Trevenant at the time, and he plays one Headringer. I don't know if for people who aren't aware of Headringer, it's this tool that you could put on your opponent's Pokemon that made it so their attack cost is one color more. So this guy just plays one copy of this card. He wins the flip. He goes first. Turn 1, just draws raw, puts it on my active Seismitoad. That means I can't attack turn 1. I can't item lock. That's really bad for Toad. So I end up losing that game, even though I really got close to winning, and I almost certainly would have won if he didn't put that Headringer down. I'm like, it's fine. That's just one game. If I win this match, I'm in top 8. It's cool. I'm just going to stay calm. Yeah, so I get to do a loss for because of the Headringer. And I go first, and I just have this awful hand, like one of the worst hands I'd had throughout the whole tournament. I'm just like, oh, this is so bad, but maybe I can make something happen. So I get an attachment, and my opponent goes Headringer again. I'm like, how is this guy just drawing his one Headringer on turn 1 both games? But he does it, and then I had a turn, right? So I got an attachment, so that means I can still get up to now it's 3 energy to attack with it, and I whiff the energy I need to actually, use Quaking Punch, even though I was able to go first. And yeah, so that just went downhill really fast. And so I lost that game, but I still made top 16, right? So I still got my boxes. So I was still able to go to the vendor and sell those and then buy myself lunch. And at the end of it, I was kind of over the moon. Like I knew that if I had won that last round, I would have made top 8 and that would have been awesome. But I was just happy to eat something. And I was super excited to be like the only person that played Toad Bats to make it to day 2, and almost clutch up that top 8.
Wow, that is wild. I mean, you were really. Is this like the time that you were basically doing Cutter Tap as like your main income? Is that kind of coincide with that?
Yeah, it was in the beginning of that though, so I wasn't like seeing very much success at all at that point. Yeah, I had like no money back then. I was just eating like beans and rice and ramen. But that was still a time where I was completely obsessed with Pokemon, so I was just doing everything I could to get to tournaments. So it was like, yeah, I'm gonna eat ramen twice every day and beans and rice and maybe some eggs, but that's gonna give me the money I need to get to nationals because it was nationals at that point. So that's just what I did. I was completely obsessed.
Yeah, and I'm glad to hear that you talking about how well Cutter Tap is doing now. I'm glad you can be in a better position now and really, succeed off of all that hard work you've done.
Yeah, I'm thrilled about it. I'm really just grateful for the whole thing. I mean, Pokemon's been amazing. Um, I have a bit more of a life now. I do other things than just play Pokemon. Like I work in construction, and I like that a lot. I like my regular job now too. Um, but after a while of just like Pokemon being the only thing, it gets to a point where it's just like I don't know. It felt pointless to me. It was like everything I'm doing here. There's no like higher goal really. Like um, I didn't have yeah, I wasn't like working towards a career that would like make me wealthy in the future. Basically was the main thing. So I was like, okay, need to get, a regular job finally so that I can hopefully climb some kind of ladder to be wealthy in the future is
Hmm.
basically my reasoning.
Yeah. As much as we all wish we could just game for the rest of our lives, there's only
Yeah.
so few spots in the Pokemon community for someone who can do that full time.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean even the guys that are doing that, they're not they're not going to get rich doing that. They're not going to be retiring early when playing getting all their income from Pokemon. Like that kind of became my goal was to be able to make sure I could retire at an age where I'm not going to be super uncomfortable working like in pain all the time.
Hmm.
That's what
Yeah,
I wanted to avoid.
of course. And then once you're retired, you
Yeah.
can go back to living full time Pokemon, right?
Yeah, exactly. There you go. Yeah.
To kind of start wrapping us up, if anyone wants to follow you, follow your work, get in touch with you, how can they do that?
I'm on Twitter. I think I'm just at Finnegan Lynch with a PH and 2 N's. So you can follow me there. If you're interested in coaching, you can send me an email at cuttertap@gmail.com. I don't do as much coaching anymore, but I'm still open to coaching more people. Um, I don't really use Facebook. I don't really use YouTube anymore. So that's pretty much it. Go on cuttertap.com and subscribe if you feel so inclined.
Yeah, and once again, I would definitely recommend it. I mean, you can, I mean, listen to the man. Look at all the work he's put in. You know, he gives a crap. You know.
I do my best.
So thank you. I mean, any final words before we start wrapping up, or anything else to say?
um, just big shout out to my teammates. Really excited for this announcement coming up soon. Again, I can't give any details about it really, but there's been some hints all over Twitter. If you're paying attention, you're probably starting to catch on. But big thing coming with Cutter Tap. Um, so yeah, shout out to all my friends, my teammates, and my family, and just everyone who supports me.
Thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate it.
Of course, thank you.
Thank you so much for tuning in, and thank you to Phinn for being so generous with his time. Hope you enjoyed our conversation. If you're interested in hearing more conversations like this one, please consider giving the podcast a follow, review, or rating wherever you're listening. If you want to follow us on social media, you can follow us on Twitter at memcappodcast. Or if you want to see me post about my own TCG experiences, you can follow me on Twitter at RZGladys. Hope you have a great day, and thank you for listening.